for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You are listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Good evening. How you doing? How you doing? Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah. How you doing? Today is Monday, July 29th, 2019. 209 days into the new year. Just 156 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south. Far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the Planet. I am your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? Kicking off a brand new week here on Fade to Black. And tonight, Don Schmitt. Don Schmitt. Tonight, we're going to be talking about his new book, just released in paperback, by the way, UFO Secrets, Inside Wright-Patterson, Eyewitness Accounts from the Real Area 51. All right, welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Don Schmitt is here. Tomorrow night, John Greenwald, the Black Vault. Wednesday night, Kimberly Meredith joining us for the first time. Going to be a great conversation. You don't want to miss that. Thursday is another Fader night with open lines all night long. But tonight, it's Don Schmitt. I love it when he stops by. Don is the former co-director of the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, where he served as director of special investigations for 10 years. Prior to that time, he was a special investigator for the late Dr. J. Allen Hynek and the art director for the International UFO Reporter. He graduated from MATC with a degree in commercial art and graduated cum laude from Concordia University with a degree in liberal arts. He's currently taking graduate courses in criminal justice. That's not true. I don't believe that. Well, I'm going to ask him in just a second. He and his co-author and partner, Tom Carey, of 18 years, have already outlined their next writing collaboration, and it will be on the UFO incident. And also tonight, we are going to discuss his newly released in paperback UFO Secrets, Inside Wright-Patterson, the Real Area 51. Witnesses are talking in this book. It is a very, very good read. You can get it over on Amazon, and the links are at jimmychurchradio.com. I'd like to welcome back to Fade to Black, Don Schmitt. Don, good evening. How are you, man?
Am I back, Jimmy? Yes, I'm back. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's always good to hear your voice. You know, and I was saying earlier today, I said, Don, I like Don. And the reason, you know why, Don, I like you so much? You are honest.
I don't know if I should ask.
You're honest. You're a positive ray of light. You're honest, and you have been doing this for such a long time. You've influenced me. I've been reading your stuff for so many years. We've become friends over the years now, which
Absolutely.
it's my honor to even say that. But Don, you're just a guy trying to figure this mess out. And you have been doing it for such a long time. And I want to thank you on behalf of this community and everyone else out there. Just thank you so much for everything that you
you're
have
very
contributed.
kind. I'm very flattered. And I want to finish it. I mean, why prolong this agony? The point being that,
Right.
For those of us who really, at times feel that we may be on the edge, we're finally on the brink, that the disclosure or the breakthrough or the evidence is finally going to be there. If some of us get a little overly passionate and anxious, it's mainly because we want to just get the damn thing done once and for all.
How does
I
it
mean, for those of us that have spent almost a lifetime at it, my God. I never forget Walt Andrus, who was the founder, the director of MUFON years ago. And when I was working with Kevin Randall at that time, and they wouldn't give us the time of day. It was like Kevin and I couldn't do anything right regarding our research. So I finally confronted Walt, and I asked him, I said, what's the problem? And he said, well, Don, if you guys solve this, you put us out of business.
Did he really? Or
Yes, and the point is, I've been trying to put us all out of business for years because let's finally solve this damn mystery and, get on with the fact that, we know it's happening, we know it's true, we know we're being visited, we know we're not alone, and then we'll have our ticker tape parade, finally, that we solved this ultimate mystery, the biggest story of the millennium. And then we can get back to our lives of normalcy and, our families. And
now, you wouldn't have anything to do.
God.
Could you imagine? Now, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions out of the gate here
Please,
before we get to the book that I've never asked you before. Okay? All right?
Go ahead, please.
Have you ever seen a UFO, Don?
No. I have seen just as much as most anyone, a peculiar light, something that for a moment may have looked a little out of the ordinary, but no, that I would have even told anybody else about it, no.
So
sadly, no.
You haven't been abducted that you know of?
I've had people suggest that I have been, and I've had just as many people suggest that I should, and it would be one way, but no.
Okay,
no flashbacks, no memories of anything of that sort.
Okay, one last question. If you live in the Midwest, and so you're up, you're cooking, you're in the backyard, nice summer night. And it happens. The craft lands in the backyard. Dude steps off and says, "Where's Don?" And you're there with your apron and your spatula, flipping burgers. And you're like, "I'm Don." I said, "Okay, come on." Do you go?
No.
Why not?
No.
Why?
Because, the fear of the unknown is such that there are no guarantees. There are no guarantees that this elusive phantom that we've been chasing all these years, and all of a sudden it becomes a Twilight Zone to serve mankind type of situation. I don't know. It's enough that we are forced to place our trust and our very well-being in the hands of supposedly more educated, politicians who only mean us well. Oh, yes. And then that we should trust even a higher intelligence. Oh, yes, it would certainly be the ultimate adventure. But I think just the confrontation would be enough.
Well,
I think just the realization. I know it's a question, Jimmy, that, it probably goes back to the very beginning. Would you get on board? Would you actually, step on for that, that ride of a lifetime. And honestly, I even think back to when Hynek was even asked that.
Well, I was going to bring it up, Don, because of Hynek. And this is, we all have our memories and our emotional ties to Act 3 of Close Encounters. Close Encounters, right? Absolutely. The craft is there, and Hynek, has got his, his walk on. But the moment when
7 seconds, absolutely.
Yes, 7 seconds, and everybody is coming off of the craft, they're returning back, to Earth, and all of this had that thought. Right? That must have been pretty cool. What did they see? What did they encounter? What are they going to talk about now? Of course, that never, materialized for Close Encounters Part 2, which they should have done. But didn't you have that same kind of emotional thought when the abductees were returning at that moment? You could possibly be one of them, right? I mean, wouldn't you do it?
I was more concerned for the fact that Spielberg, Amblin, they liberally use, the files at QFOS at that time. And there were specific scenes throughout the movie that were based on actual reports. So in many ways, we were looking out for Dr. Hynek in that he was portrayed in such a way that was with dignity, respect. And there were political things, there were legal things that were going on at the time with his publisher, and there was withheld royalties. And in all frankness, Spielberg did not treat Dr. Hynek as well as he should have financially. And I think because we were more caught up in that at the time, it probably spoiled, that element, that impression that I should have had. And then, if I take it even a little bit further, it was right after Dr. Hynek, they had filmed the Devil's Tower, that very scene. Mm-hmm. And we had a party, we had a dinner party at the Hynek residence in Evanston, Illinois. And I'll never forget being with Alan in the kitchen, and I said to him, well, I suppose the Close Encounters is now your favorite UFO movie. To which he responded, no, Don, I still agree with you. It's still the day the earth stood still.
Yeah. You know what? To this day, I watch the day that the earth stood still, and I think to myself, that's exactly how it would go down. That, the Army shoot first, yes, crazy, yes, stupid, yes, trigger happy, that mentality. There was, the ET on the run, feared for his life. And, there's things about it that I thought were very, very accurate. And I love that movie.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And especially at the advent of the Cold War, that was our response to most anything we didn't comprehend, we didn't understand, or that we feared.
Right.
That we immediately called in the Marines, so to speak. And I think that's the reason. And I think now, if it were a Michael Rennie who would invite me on board, see, for the longest time, for having seen that movie as a young boy,
right,
when it premiered on Saturday night at the movies on NBC, and for years I had nightmares of Gort, waking up in the middle of the night and seeing him stepping into the doorway of my bedroom. And so there again, as benevolent as Klaatu, the Michael Rennie character, was, he still threatened us with total annihilation.
Yes, he did. Hey,
that, in other words, and I guess that's the point, that you wouldn't trust someone that could squash you like a bug, and just for the thrill of just that momentary, feeling of just the exhilaration, being within. I guess I would ask, can I take a little tour? But keep this thing on the ground.
Yeah,
that might be as far as I'd go.
Well, and there was
we're not lifting off.
There was something else about, I can't believe we're talking about this, but
I know, but it's fun.
It's so much fun. In the Day That the Earth Stood Still, version 1, there was another aspect to this that didn't happen in Earth and the Flying Saucers or any other, vampires from Mars, whatever movie, right? But
right.
Technically, the special effects, the spaceship, the seamless Gort, everything was real. It looked real. It was just fantastic. It was eye candy. And you didn't get that from anything else, right? It was just, low budget stuff, fun to watch, entertainment. But the Day That the Earth Stood Still, technically, the construction of everything was seamless perfection. And that was the other thing that freaked me out about the movie. It took me there. It was very realistic.
Much of that was a result of the director, Robert Wise, who, was very much into the subject even at that time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then to finally have met him, and then for his attending the premiere of our Roswell movie at the Directors Guild. And his approaching us and then taking me by the hand and just, I am so proud of you boys. He just went on and on and on. And coming from someone, of that reputation.
Right.
And it just came full circle from being, just scared to death of his movie to the point that he was then complimenting me that many years later. And that he was proud of what we had accomplished. Oh, my. I could have never predicted that in a million years.
When did, so it was the Directors Guild on Sunset Boulevard?
Yes.
That's a big deal, man. That's a big deal. That's a big deal.
Absolutely, because we had filmed the movie in 35 millimeter with the thought that, my God, we got a playwright, Arthur Coppett, who did the screenplay, and we got a major cast of characters, top to bottom. We have a major director in Jeremy Kagan,
mm-hmm.
and as far as Elliot Goldenthal did the score, and Stephen Posner, who did E.T., did as far as the cinematography. So they thought, my God, we could go a feature with this. So they decided, let's shoot it in 35. And it had a limited run in a few theaters, L.A., New York, I think at least one in D.C. And then they pulled the plug on it, to our, chagrin. But the movie still stands. I mean, we just celebrated the 25th anniversary. And also, not forgetting that we were nominated Best Made-for-TV Movie, Golden Globe Awards in 1994.
Well, here we are in 2019, where things now are moving along at a pretty fast clip, my friend.
I'd like to believe that. Yes.
It's almost too much. Is it a situation now where we need to be careful what we wish for? What's your take on that with the way that UFOs and ET and alien contact are in the mainstream media and on the news nearly every day of the week now?
Well, and God knows that I have jumped the shark a number of times myself, just in that over-enthusiasm, and obviously it's made me all the more cautious and apprehensive.
It has
through the years.
Sure.
It's just a natural reaction to believing and wanting something to finally be the final solution, to the point that you rely on the experts to lead the way, and then it falls short. But you're the one left as far as with the egg on the face, and that's where we may... It's different with this, and I say it for this reason, and I pointed this out a number of times. If this was the Air Force, because the Air Force has been leading the deception and the cover-up for now 72 years.
That's right.
If it were to be the Air Force today, I wouldn't give them, the time of day. It's just, how do you put the genie back in the bottle? How do you finally say, just kidding, we were lying all these years, and now we're going to tell you the truth finally. But with the Navy, and these were discussions we had years ago, and even going back to Hynek, and especially post Project Blue Book. Now, what most people aren't aware of or they don't consider is that with Blue Book, they think that it encompassed all the reports that were coming in, Air Force, Navy, Army, Marine Corps, that type of thing. No, it was almost all Air Force. In fact, when Blue Book was declassified back in 1977, it was, well, where are all the Navy cases? Where are all the other branches? Well, they had their own investigations, and they kept them to themselves. They were never public. They were never announced. But nonetheless, they had their own investigations. And wouldn't we love to see those? So here the Navy is acting like they're the new kids on the block, when they've had global surveillance. I mean, the Air Force, is restricted to within, their sovereign airspace, and if we acquire other countries' reports, it's very seldom that we have access to the foreign cases. But with the Navy, they've been investigating this for just as long, and their files are brimming over. And so that's where I have some hope that with the Navy, and I keep pointing out as well, they're in competition with the other branches. Don't let anybody kid you that they're all working together. No, they do not work together. And that was quite evident, like with Desert Storm, when Stormin' Norman Schwarzkopf, with the Army, was lamenting the fact that the Air Force wasn't telling them when they declared air supremacy if they could march into downtown Baghdad safely or not, and the Navy was still launching as far as Tomahawk missiles and cruise missiles, and nobody was on the same page together. So that's recently. So that's where I have hope that with the Navy now maybe stepping a foot into the fore and saying, now we're going to open our doors. Because our record is clear. We haven't been lying about this. We've been very methodically working on this for now 70-some years, and this is what we know. And the second part of it being the fact that social media is going to continue the pressure. You mentioned as far as that there's a day that goes by that we're not getting more information, another report, more news coverage. And that's the difference. There should be a momentum and a crescendo that finally we reach a point that people are not going to storm Area 51. They're just going to all start pointing their finger at Washington and saying, you've had the proof all these years, and we demand to see it.
What about the part where the Navy is saying, well, they're seeing something. We don't know what's going on, but we're interested. Well, that part, that's a little misleading, isn't it? The Navy knows exactly what's going on. Why would they?
Well, sure they do.
Yeah. I mean, they know if these are drones and our technology or foreign technology, Russian, Chinese, whatever.
They should. But it's still, I break it down to the three possibilities, that either they're ours and we don't want the Russians and the Chinese to know that we have this new technology, or they're either Russian or Chinese, and we have a lot of catching up to do, and they're waiting for the paycheck. We need an increased military allowance, to play catch up, or they're no ones, and they don't know anything about it, and they're just as much in the dark as we are. And I believe it's the latter. I believe it's a case of that they are just as much in awe at what they are observing, no less than they were 72 years ago, that the phenomena still smacks of, a technology that we cannot bridge, we cannot catch up to, and as a result, the pilots themselves are just, oh my God, did you see what that thing just did?
Right. It's very interesting to me, and I hope that, I don't trust the Pentagon, I don't trust the Navy, I don't trust the Air Force, I don't trust the MIA of any. No. Like you said, they've been ridiculing this community for a very, very, very long time. And to come along now and go, hey, I'm now your best friend. It's going to take.
Now you can trust us. Now you can believe us. Well, I think that's one of the wonderful things that Roswell has especially taught me, in that if the government could resort to such extreme measures back at that time. In other words, that secrecy was more important than anyone's civil rights. That if they could do that for a weather balloon device, then what could they do for something really extraordinary?
In their opinion, right, yes.
In their opinion,
yes,
right.
Yes. And when we come back, I want you to think about this. Again, this is a question I've never asked you before. But you, in working with Hynek, this is a yes or no question, did you memorize Project Blue Book? Did you go over all of the cases that were there?
No, for one simple reason. Because Hynek already forewarned us that it was a scam, that all the hardcore cases, as he would put it, went upstairs, that there was really nothing significant in the Blue Book files. Most of the cases were the cases, as he would say, they would jump cartwheels in going to the press, the public, whenever they could explain away a case. And in knowing that he was so totally frustrated that he did not have access to the data, the legitimate cases that he was hoping the longer he would allow them to string him along, they may finally take him into their confidence. And I can honestly tell your audience and you, Jimmy, up to the day he died, they never did.
When we come back, we're going to continue this discussion. It's way, way too important. Did you get a chance? We've got 1 minute, one last. Did you get a chance to formulate an opinion on Project Blue Book on History Channel?
Well, first of all, anything that provides a new audience, a new level of entertainment that draws a new selection of people into the fold, I think is commendable. But as far as the accuracy, no, because Hynek spent very little of any time in the field. About the only case that he actually investigated in the field was Socorro in April of '64.
Right, and there's
otherwise
evidence of that.
They kept him away, knowing that he was going to question their every move.
That one scene in I'm going to roll to a commercial here, but there's that one scene where he's walking through von Braun's laboratory, right?
Mm-hmm,
and the ETs are in the tanks of liquid. And I'm like, now, wait a minute here. Right now,
never happened.
Right. Well, of course, and I just thought to myself, if they are revealing, stuff from his diary or something that's never been, discussed before, and that actually happened, holy crap. But I know that it didn't. But this is the thing.
It never did.
No, of course not. But this is the thing. The people out there that are seeing this for the first time are assuming, because of the way that they start the show and the way they, this is from the actual files of Project Blue Book, right? That this is a nonfiction treatment, right? That this actually happened.
That's correct, and that is correct. And when they say that these are from the files of Project Blue Book, they're portraying cases that Blue Book never investigated. That is the other deception on their part. Strictly for entertainment purposes, and we know that's what the show is all about.
You know what? It's fun to watch, though. Fun to watch. It's fun to watch. Let's take a break. Our guest tonight, the one and only Don Schmitt. I'm holding up his new book to the camera. It's just released in paperback, UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Patterson. We'll get to all of that right after this short break. Stay with me. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm Jimmy Church. Tonight, Don Schmitt. Tom Carey and Don wrote UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Pat. It's right there, holding it up. You can go to Amazon, get it now. Just released in paperback. I've read this thing cover to cover now 3 times, Don. It's a great read. I learned so much stuff from this book, and this is my next question. I set you up for the fall with this next question. And it's this, honestly, Don. Roswell comes along. You've been working with Hynek. You've been doing this. You've been investigating. You've been looking. You are just, you're up to it, to your neck. Roswell comes along. Did you go, well, wait a minute here. Hold on. Did you go back and look through your research material going back, 50, 60 years to find any mention of Roswell anywhere? You know what I mean? It's not in Blue Book. It's not anywhere. This is strange to me. What went through your mind? Not, if you think about it, not Kehoe, right? Not Long John Nebel out of New York doing late night talk radio. Nobody mentioned Roswell before, did they?
Well, I mean, there were a few mentions, like with Frank Edwards and Harold Wilkins, and a few books through the 60s. And as we all know, the main whistleblower was Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer at Roswell in 1947, when he broke his oath of secrecy in 1978 when he was diagnosed with emphysema. But even when the first book came out in 1980, Roswell Incident by Moore and Berlitz, I didn't buy it. I wasn't interested. In fact, I was very skeptical on the very notion. In fact, I wrote a paper in 1985 that I just could not accept that they could keep something of that magnitude a secret after all that time. But they were so effective as far as in creating the straw man and tearing it down, and getting the press as far as to align themselves with the counter story, that the true nature of what took place, and the fact that they were very adept at keeping secrets, because it was in the face of the Manhattan Project with the atomic bomb, and then just 2 years after World War II, so they were all heavily schooled in keeping their mouths quiet. And as a result, it couldn't have happened at a better time to keep secrets. And so even approaching this as a skeptic 9 years later, in 1989, with Kevin Rando, as we both were skeptical on the case, we thought we'd make a single weekend jaunt down to New Mexico and, prove this was a weather balloon device or something just as prosaic. And it was within the first trip and speaking to first-hand witnesses that handled the wreckage, and we thought, what if we're wrong? And we quickly realized that they were all on, very consistent, describing the same details, the same exotic qualities of the wreckage, and we realized we better come up to speed on this, because we did not have anything in our notes, in our files regarding this. And the last thing we wanted was for this to hit us like a ton of bricks, and then we wouldn't be able to crawl out from underneath it.
Right, and when you go and listen, which I have done, and you go and listen to, I just brought up Long John Nebel, and listen to his series of radio shows out of New York. And one of them specifically has Kenneth Arnold on, Donald Kehoe, and four or five other researchers. And they're all, his show was called The Party Line. So he would have like 5 guests, and they would sit around and talk about things. And this is 1958. So they're all sitting there talking, and they're bringing up Nazi flying saucers in 1958. They're bringing up Menzel, right? They're bringing up, of course,
Howard Menzer, or Howard Menzer, the contact, George Adamski, and right.
No, the P-51 Mustang over Ohio.
Thomas Mantell.
Mantell. What did I say? Menzel? Right. Mantell. And Kenneth Arnold, of course, is talking about Mount Rainier. And they're bringing up all of these. Nobody mentions Roswell. In Kehoe's book, Flying Saucers Are Real, which I have over at the house. It was just gifted to me, an original copy of the book. No mention of Roswell. And it's amazing to me, not only the cover-up, but that the rest of America managed to forget about it too as well. It was covered majorly in July of 1947, but was effectively erased from pop culture, too, that nobody else would bring it up.
Yes, it was. And we need to also keep in mind that up till Roswell, there was a spiraling upward list of reports that were coming in, banner headlines. Your listeners could go to any public library and pull out all the microfilm, all the microfiche of the newspapers, the press accounts, that last week of June, first week of July of 1947, and you would swear we were being invaded. And for a lot of the people at the Pentagon at that time, it was like, oh my God, we have a real war of the worlds. Just 9 years after that radio broadcast, we have one actually on our hands because we don't know what we're dealing with. And then the attempts to try to bring one down, and then the attempts to at least try to capture something on camera. And then Roswell happens. And they put out that press release on Tuesday, July 8th, that they actually captured a flying saucer. But that was all part of the staged cover-up. That was all part of how they were going to then deal with the entire situation, because it wasn't just a balloon press conference where they swept this under the carpet forever, or they had hoped to, but then they put on balloon demonstrations all over the country over the next few weeks, trying to put a nail in the entire flying saucer coffin. And the sighting reports dropped off drastically. You would have sworn that they packed up and went home, whoever they were. But the sightings continued. It's just that the people, because of now the escalating ridicule factor, the fact that the government was demonstrating that we're not going to treat this subject seriously. We're not going to listen to you any longer because, as far as we're concerned, they're just balloons. It's all explainable. They're all hoaxes. Nothing to see here. But in reality, the phenomena persisted. And then, especially leading up to the overflights of D.C. in July of 1952, then it was a case of where the CIA steps in and goes, well, the Air Force is incompetent. They can't even control the situation any longer, so we're going to. And then the rest becomes history. But it was all done in such a way, whether it was Keyhole, who they were spoon-feeding just mundane cases just to keep him distracted. They kept Keyhole on a tight leash. They kept Hynek on a tight leash. They were making sure that they did not have, as I was describing Hynek earlier, access to the hardcore, the real important cases that were going on. And that's where Project Blue Book was such a disappointment, because when they were finally declassified, there was really nothing there.
Was there a change in Hynek's belief system of the reality of the UFO question later on in his life? Was there, and putting the TV series aside and his family aside, but from what you knew, do you think that he was exposed to the truth about UFOs and just never spoke about it?
Not intentionally, and whatever truth he was exposed to was by his own tenacity, his own aggressiveness in finding the truth. He was never provided the truth that we have ever been able to determine. In fact, when Alan Hendry was our chief investigator at the Center for UFO Studies, and he was with the family after Dr. Hynek was at the Moffitt Clinic in San Francisco, and he had the brain tumor removed. And even in the old recovery room right after that operation, that Hynek was tossing and turning, and all he kept saying over and over again, "Why can't they tell me? Why can't they tell me now?" So even at that point, he felt that he had been totally abandoned, that he, in many ways, I tell the story, and he had told this to myself and a few others, including Bud Hopkins, the late Bud Hopkins, that he knew Donald Rumsfeld personally. In fact, when Rumsfeld originally was a congressman, Hynek was one of his constituents in Evanston, Illinois. In fact, when they had the initial hearings before Congress in 1966, the very person who glowingly introduced Hynek on the floor of, as far as the House of Representatives, was none other than Congressman Donald Rumsfeld. And then when Rumsfeld became Gerald Ford's first Secretary of Defense, and then later when he became George W. Bush's Secretary of Defense. So, but it was during the Ford administration that Hynek was in Washington, and he thought, I'm going to pay a little visit to my former congressman, and I'm going to lay it on the table. And Hynek would tell us the story that he was sitting in Rumsfeld's office, then Secretary of Defense for the first time, as far as under Gerald Ford, President Gerald Ford. And he said to him, I believe I've given enough of my life that I deserve an answer. I've devoted and committed myself to providing as far as a scientific attitude towards the resolution of the UFO phenomenon. I've given you all these years, and you have given me nothing in return. I believe I deserve something. And Hynek would describe that Rumsfeld got up from behind his desk, walked over to him, looked down at him, and put his finger right in his face and said, you have no right to know.
I have here, I'm not going to hold them up to the camera or go through it. I have a bunch of Hynek's original investigations, from CUFOS. And looking through them and the way that the interviews were conducted and looking at the signatures at the bottom of, the investigators as well as the witnesses, these are incredible cases. And most of them, I've covered them on the show, but they're not out there in the mainstream. They have been covered in books or documentaries. And there are some very important cases that were happening there. Why didn't Hynek choose to go more public with this? It seems like he would be able to pound his fist on the table and go, look at this case, and look at this case, and look at this case, and be more vocal about it. It seemed like he went in the other direction. Was he frustrated?
Oh, totally frustrated, and more bitter, as far as especially in the latter part of his life. He would often make the comment, what will Carl say? What will Carl say?
Right. When
we were working on a case, and then he was referencing Carl Sagan. And much of that stemmed from that infamous debate between the two of them. And poor Alan Hynek, who came across like Don Knotts with his shaking hands and with his notes and his speech. And then Sagan, the consummate performer, stepping out in front of the podium and taking the microphone and just doing shtick for an hour, that type of thing. Hynek never got over that. And it was no less than the way Donald Menzel, the Harvard astrophysicist, and what Edward Condon, as far as with the Condon report, what they did to Hynek, they were constantly ridiculing and making every effort to discredit him. And Hynek, not only was he a slight, demure man, but he also was a soft-spoken, very humble scientist. And I never heard him once become angry or agitated to the point that he even raised his voice. Because I don't know if he was capable of really, demonstrating as far as that level of frustration.
Did you learn something? Did you learn something from that, Don, in that you've never given up? You've gone through your ups and downs in this community over the years, and did you learn something from the way that Dr. Hynek dealt with this and his personality? Are you different because of it?
I look back on a number of things. First of all, on one occasion, CUFOS had an investigator's test that they were circulating throughout the field. And it was after a board meeting, and I was at the Hynek residence, and John P. Timmerman was our vice president at that time. It was a major benefactor for the center, and so he was very closely allied with Dr. Hynek at that time. And I'll never forget Timmerman commenting to Dr. Hynek, I didn't notice Don's results in the test. Aren't you going to give Don the test? And Hynek kind of smirked, and then he went, give him that he could test me. And coming from J. Allen Hynek, I could test him. And then later, before the Smithsonian debate, which included Hynek and our, again, chief investigator Alan Hendry and Dr. Bruce Maccabee versus Philip J. Klass and James Oberg and Robert Schaefer at the Smithsonian. I was one of Hynek's coaches.
I would have loved to have been on that one. I would have slapped some people around.
But I was one of his coaches. So in other words, as we were rehearsing and practicing, I was one of the coaches. And then I stepped forward after Alan passed away. 3 years later, we're having the very first archaeological dig at the crash site, at the debris field. And Mimi Hynek, Alan's widow, was there with us. She had an archaeological background. They were, she was living in Scottsdale, as the Hyneks did in the last 2 years of his life. And so we thought it was just how opportune, how wonderful that she could drive over from Arizona and be with us. And if she said it once, she said it a dozen times. When she looked at us and she went, "Ellen would be so proud of you boys." And that's all I have to think of. That Dr. J. Allen Hynek started something, and I damn well I'm going to do all I can to finish it. Because I'd like to believe he is still up there looking down and going, "I'm proud of you boys."
Hopefully he didn't watch the new series, though.
Well,
oh man.
Well, it's credit long overdue, but again, with so much creative license that Hollywood has a reputation of exercising, but he always would tell us, as long as I'm there at the finish line, it doesn't matter who's there first or how we get there. I just want to be there.
I didn't know.
I guess that would be part of it.
Yeah. I'm watching every episode, which I did. I watched a couple of them twice. I said out loud to Rita a few times, "Oh man, he's turning in his grave right now," because I didn't know that he was involved in shootouts and plane crashes and alien bodies.
I know recreations of plane crashes but he did love field investigation. That was one of the things. He was so stifled with the Air Force, with Project Blue Book, who always again kept him away from field work. And once he started the center, and that's when he could go to Papua New Guinea, and he could go up to Hessdalen, and he could trudge through knee-deep snow and the Hudson Valley boomerang sightings in the early 80s, and Jenny Zeidman, who was his private secretary, and we were always joking that Alan's in his element right now because he's out there playing cowboys and Indians. And to us, it was much more than that, but it was like he was doing exactly what the Air Force essentially handcuffed him from doing, and that was actual field investigation. Because if Alan could have done what the series is portraying, dramatizing, he would have.
Now, your book, which we're talking about Hynek and Project Blue Book, your book, UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Patterson, Hynek's offices, Blue Book's offices were at Wright-Pat, right?
Absolutely. Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book, all headquartered at Wright-Pat.
And did he understand the history? Because we're going to start talking about Wright-Pat right now, but did he understand the history of Wright-Pat and its ties to aliens and ET at that time?
No, he did not. And in fact, that was the ongoing, joke, that as long as no one even realized that there were sub levels, that there were secret hangars. Again, Hynek and even Jenny Zeidman would describe how they had a specific route, a drive onto the base, and they went directly to Blue Book headquarters, which was just a single room in one of the office buildings, and he never was allowed to see or tour any other buildings, hangars, facilities on the base. In fact, she talked about that if they drove off course. In fact, she feared for her life on one occasion where she described that she found herself in a restricted area and she thought she was going to get shot.
I had a friend, it doesn't matter who it was, on the show, this was a couple of years ago, and we were just having a conversation like you and I are having now, and that this person worked on the base and said that everybody on base at Wright-Pat, civilian employee, government employee, Air Force, it doesn't matter. Everybody talks about UFOs. Everybody talks about the alien bodies at Wright-Pat. It's like, it's an open conversation. They have T-shirts, right? You can go, can't you go to the Wright-Pat gift shop and buy a hanger?
At the very Air Museum, absolutely. You can take a tour, and the guide will even jokingly point to a different hangar, depending on what day of the week, and say, and that's where we keep the pickled aliens on ice.
Right. So that's how you do it, right? You joke about it. That's how you
do it. You keep discrediting it. You keep mocking it. You keep making fun of it. I'll give you a quick example, Jimmy. When the first version of this now new book came out, Inside the Real Area 51, The Secret History of Wright-Patterson. And producer-director Paul Davids was contacted by public relations at Wright-Patterson. And they asked, you wouldn't have any of the props, or you wouldn't know where we could find any of the props from the Roswell movie that you did a number of years ago. And he responded, well, as a matter of fact, I have the very animatronic alien in my possession that was from the movie. And they said, well, would it be possible that we might be able to borrow it for some extended period of time? And Paul immediately called me and he said, well, Don, I'm thinking I could make this into a summer tour. I could do a cross-country drive from L.A. to Dayton, Ohio, with the alien, sitting next to me in the front seat.
Right on.
And I said, well, let's do it if we can get one consolidation. And that was, we want to show the movie. We'll bring the alien if we can show the Roswell movie on the base. And the base commander got involved, and he immediately declined and said, we are not about to provide our staff and personnel with a position contrary to official Air Force policy on the subject.
What?
So once again, we're not going to let you think for yourselves. We're not going to provide you with an opportunity. Now, mind you, when the movie first came out on video, it was the number one requested film by on military bases all around the world.
Of course it was. And what? So they didn't have it at the Post Exchange at Wright-Pat. You couldn't rent it, right?
Well, they may have initially, but it may have been quickly, withdrawn as far as from the shelves. But here, and we finally figured out what they were doing. Our book was slated for release, the very book on Wright-Patterson, for September of that year, the very time that they wanted to display the alien from the movie. And again, make a mockery of it. We're not hiding anything. We're not covering anything up. Here's the alien. That type of situation.
Let's take a break. Let's take a break.
We called their bluff, and we won.
Let's take a break right here. And when we come back, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have some fun. I'm going to randomly choose some subjects from the book, and I want your color commentary.
Please.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Don Schmitt is our guest. The book, I'm holding it up to the camera, just released in paperback. UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Patterson. More with Mr. Schmitt when we come back after this short break. Stay with us. welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. That's what you want to do. Hashtag F2B is the sandbox. Hashtag F2BQ is Fade to Black questions. Yeah, you guys have posted a lot of great stuff here for Don tonight. I'll see if I can squeeze it in. Hey, Don, are you going to Area 51 on September 20th? Did I see your name signed up?
Yes. I have a campsite all selected, and I'm going to take my telescope, and no, we were joking last night, setting up a water stand. And
that's the money. That's the money play right there. That's the money play. That's a good call. That's the money.
And somebody seriously said, Don, we really need to do that, and I'd be willing to invest the money. I have an RV, and it's like, no. Again. You think back to Area 51 back in the 90s when, those former employees had that class action suit.
Right.
Where they claimed that they had been exposed to all types of toxic waste and everything was coming in, nothing was going out, that type of thing. If they could treat their own employees like that, what do you think they're going to do to a bunch of invaders that would storm the gates, so to speak? So.
Are you surprised about the attention that this has got, not only from the mainstream media, but you've got 2 million people that have signed up for this thing and another 3 million that are saying they're interested?
I know, but I'm trusting that of those 2 to 3 million or 5 million, that most of them are not within the UFO community. They're not legitimate, researchers and investigators. They're not even students of the topic. I know was it a gamer who he actually made the proposal initially, and now he's saying it was more of on a lark, that he never intended it to be a serious effort on his part, and it just kind of gotten out of control. But it truly demonstrates the naivety of people, and that my God, I mean, the signs are right there for all to see that lethal force, will be utilized if anyone, trespasses beyond a certain point, and they're not kidding. And I think all one need do is Google the area, and you'll see that there are no RV camps, there are no motels, there are no restaurants, there's no rest stops, no gas stations. They're in for a rude awakening if they think that they're going to just nonchalantly march in and make a parade out of this.
Yeah, I'm holding up to the camera one of the signs from Area 51 that, don't ask me how I got it, but got it right here, holding it up to the camera. It's a big sign, too. It literally says use of deadly force authorized. And got it right here. Well, this is the other interesting part, though. It may have started off as a joke and, a gamer and the gamer community. Okay. But the interest in Area 51 seems to be real. That's where.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's where this thing took off, because this was on the back of everybody's minds, right? It's like they had a reason now, because they've been thinking about it for a long time. They've heard about it. And now there's this. I don't think anybody realized that many people actually knew what Area 51 was. And
the very fact that here again we have come full circle. The point being that they're not demanding to see documents. They're not looking to see, well, we want to see the best pictures, the prettiest pictures you have of UFOs. No. They're demanding to see the physical evidence. They're demanding to see the bodies. Well, what are we talking about all over? We're talking Roswell. So I guess I should be at least somewhat, at least flattered, complimented by the fact that it doesn't go away. That no matter how often they come up with another explanation for 1947, that even different variations on the same balloon theme, that it doesn't go away. That Roswell has become a household word around the world, and it does not, imply crashed weather balloon. It's exactly what we're seeing in the news today. I mean, Tucker Carlson, every time he talks about this subject, and no matter who he talks to, he asks, Does the government have physical evidence? And he actually words it, do they have a crashed UFO?
Well,
and again,
yeah,
we're talking Roswell.
Yeah. And in the recent Davis Wilson leaked documents, there's a pretty interesting line. I think it's on the last page, on page 15, which said UFO crashes and landings are real. Abductions are not. And now, to say crashes and landed craft, well, that says two different things. One is involuntary, right, the crash, and one is not, landed. And that's a pretty telling situation that there is.
It is, but it could be also a play on words, because even at the time of Roswell, many of the press accounts describe it as landed. And in fact, even to this day, many of the press stories on Roswell refer to it as the UFO that landed in New Mexico, landed north of Roswell, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's clearly a distinction between a crash and a landing. For any of us who fly, it makes all the difference in the world. But whenever I'm asked, for example, well, do you believe in abductions? Do you believe in missing time experiences? Or do you believe in other crashes, that type of thing? And I have to always catch myself in that if I accept Roswell, then I have to accept that everything else is possible. Mm-hmm. I just can't, put these guidelines on, and these restrictions on, well, but this is my case, this is what I'm working on, and it automatically disqualifies anything else. I'm threatened by anybody else's research, anything else somebody else is working on. Well, no, that would be totally disingenuous on my part.
In the book, there's lots of reasons to get the book, and it's a lot of new information. But I want to go directly to a couple of chapters, and one which it's pretty amazing, and you covered it before. But it's June Crane.
Yes.
June Crane. She's no longer with us. She's no longer with us. But who is June Crane?
June Crane worked at Wright-Patterson in the early to mid-1950s. She was a secretary who worked specifically in document and actually monitoring inventory, things that were coming onto the base and things that were going off the base. And it was at some point that she actually saw reports concerning crashed saucers. In other words, they were keeping track, obviously, of such wreckage coming onto the base. And she recounted on a number of occasions where she spoke to personnel who had just arrived back at the base. And on one occasion, one referenced New Mexico, referenced what had happened back in 47, referenced the fact that it was more than just wreckage, that it was also bodies. And on another occasion, June Crane was actually provided a piece to hold. She held a piece of the memory material, whether it was from Roswell or some subsequent subsequent crash. Nonetheless, she described it exactly as the Roswell witnesses, that when you creased it, you crumbled it, when you folded it, when you released your grip, it returned right before your eyes to its original shape and size. No damage whatsoever. And when we first interviewed, Kevin Randall and I were the first ones to interview June, but we used a pseudonym at her request. And it was then 10 years later, not quite, but when the Air Force came out with the anthropomorphic wooden crash dummy explanation, that was her final straw. She felt that it was the last insult that she was going to tolerate, and she went public. And she stood up and she used her name. She had cancer at the time, so it was enough of the lies. And she stepped forward and said, I saw it, I held it in my hands. I saw the documents. I saw the reports. I spoke to the people who were involved. And ladies and gentlemen, it's true. It did happen. And Wright-Patterson was the final depository of this proof that we were not alone.
And it was the crash dummy. You know what, that crash dummy situation was like one of the final straws for me too when that report came out, because even I, and it sounds like June did too, that even I knew that the dates were wrong. Right? I knew that the dates were wrong. And I remember driving home in my car.
5 years removed.
5 years removed.
Project Excelsior and High Dive didn't even originate until 1952.
That's right.
And then they came up with that, that concoction that is not in a single medical or psychiatric journal anywhere, of time compression. The idea that as we get older, we not only start to confuse the years, but also the decades. Well, poppycock. And then on top of it, we immediately sent a fax to the Pentagon at that time, which we informed them that, just for your information, all of the body witnesses that we have interviewed concerning the 1947 incident were no longer in New Mexico in 1952, so they could not have been witnesses to any wooden crash dummies, as you would suggest. So, as the Pentagon spokesperson at the very end of that press conference, when he was asked by a reporter, well, what if the people don't believe this explanation? To which he responded, well, then I guess we'll be back in another few years offering another explanation. So it was simply a case of running out the clock, stalling for time, and that's all they were doing.
Did June have a security clearance?
Yes, she did. She did.
And she also signed, I think you mentioned it in the book, she signed an NDA
non-disclosure.
too. Right.
And she would comment that because she was dying of cancer, she would comment they couldn't hurt her any longer. In fact, she even dared them to try to take some action or, some reprisal as far as on her speaking out, because she was calling their bluff. She just felt that they forced her to live with news, with information about the biggest story, of the millennium. And here she saw that she was going to die with nobody having any idea, any awareness of what she knew to be the truth all that time. And she was going to make sure that she had the last word.
How many people work at Wright-Pat? I mean, you have the Air Force, but you also have all of the government civilian employees, too, as well, in the support system that's at Wright-Pat. And it's a big base.
Oh, yes. It's like a small city. In fact, it is a city unto itself. In fact, they have their own nuclear reactor on the base. But during World War II, it went up to almost 50,000 personnel on the base. And at times it has been 70, 75,000. So it's just it's the number one. In fact, again, the thought that Area 51 is this end all, that it's this, the ultimate, security, military facility in the world. No, Wright-Pat still holds, that honor. It is the number one military facility in the world.
Yeah, it's pretty massive. Now, when you have that many, not only Air Force personnel, but civilian employees that are government employees, but that are not active Air Force personnel on the base, it's impossible to keep everybody quiet. Now, there are, you have the patriotic duty as a citizen to keep your mouth shut. That's part of working for the military, and I respect that. But then there's the other side of it where it is impossible to keep everybody quiet forever. Is she the first of many that could be coming forward? And at some point, where aliens are not necessarily a security or a military situation, but it's a humanity, story here. Where the mind is going to change on your position on this. Is she the first of many that will be coming forward? What do you think?
I would certainly like to believe so. And though we name a good number of former Wright-Pat personnel, both military and civilian, and certainly one of our star witnesses who happened to be at T2, which would become Foreign Technology Division in 1961, was the late General Arthur Exxon. He was at the base when the Roswell material first arrived, and gave us a full account of what he learned as far as the testing on that wreckage at that time. And then in 1964, he was the base commander at Wright-Pat. And even as the base commander, he described to us that there were entire areas of the base that were off limits, even to him as the base commander. And so that just fueled more and more of the storyline of these multiple levels, these subterranean levels. We've heard as many as 10 levels beneath the surface of these huge hangars and vaults and storage areas and secret places that even the base commander didn't have access to. And our good friend Ben Hansen, formerly with the FBI, and then did the Sci-Fi Channel Fact or Fake TV series. And his very grandfather was a civil engineer, and he was on TWY as far as he was on temporary duty at Wright-Pat for a number of summers. And his assignment was to service the elevators that ran to these multiple levels beneath the surface. And before he died, all he would admit was, "We are not alone." That's what he told Ben's father, based on what he supposedly saw or heard at Wright-Pat. But nonetheless, he was a witness to the fact that they are these sub-levels that so much of our history, and especially our UFO history, has been hidden away, has been part of this underground vault. And I like to believe that this book exposes much of that based on the testimony of a lot of these former personnel.
If you were given a choice to take the full tour of Area 51 or you get the full tour of Wright-Pat, where do you go?
51.
Yeah, you go to 51.
From all of our sources, from all the information, including a former deputy commander on the base, just about everything, if not everything, was cleared out of Wright-Pat in the early 80s. We had a full bird colonel made the comment to us that, as he put it, they were having a hell of a time being in the heart of Dayton, Ohio. I mean, they're right in the middle of the city there.
Yep.
And it just didn't make any sense any longer. So little by little, they were shipping things out. And obviously the most viable, the most logical place would be someplace, out in the desert, someplace out in the mountains. And what are we describing? Groom Lake. 51.
Well, but the same statements have been made about Area 51, that its cover is blown and everything's been shipped out and is now at Wright-Pat. So I mean,
no, I wouldn't believe that things went back to Wright-Pat. That would make no sense at all. For having been on the base, and again, it is in the middle of Dayton, Ohio, and that would make no sense at all. Now we have heard, for example, during that class action suit against 51 back in the 90s, that much of the activity was shifted to Area 52, which is Utah. Dugway.
Yes.
Dugway, yes. And what we also describe in the book is that we have a retired colonel in the late 50s who testified that he saw one of the bodies didn't know, of what event, what it, how it was recovered, what it involved, but that he saw a cadaver, non-human, at Dugway in the late 50s. And then we tie that in with the story of the late Colonel George Weinbrenner, who happened to be Hynek's last boss at Wright-Pat. And Weinbrenner was the head of the Foreign Technology Division, which did all the reverse engineering. Whenever they had recovered MiG or a German Messerschmitt or anything that they wanted to see how it flew, how it ticked. And that's how even the Operation Paperclip with the German, the Nazi scientists were often utilized, and they spent a good amount of their time at Wright-Pat. But so the point being that whatever happened in Roswell, it also went to Wright-Pat. It went to Foreign Technology in an attempt to reverse engineer and find out how it flew, so to speak. But Weinbrenner, Hynek's last boss at Foreign Technology, before he died, he sent a message to Robert Emenegger, personal friend, Emenegger, who wrote the book UFOs Past, Present, and Future. And he had been contracted in the mid-'70s to do a documentary for the Air Force. And his main contact was George Weinbrenner at Wright-Pat. And the story is that Weinbrenner, before he died, sent a personal note to Emenegger, which read, "George, we have 5 bodies in Utah." Well, we know what he was talking about, and he was referencing Dugway. So then, the last time I had dinner with Colonel Robert Friend. Now, Friend just passed away a few months ago, but I had dinner with him on one occasion in Los Angeles. And I asked him point blank, right to his face, I said, "Colonel, if you did have bodies." Now, Friend was the second last director of Project Blue Book. So he was still very skeptical, very coy. He didn't want to admit anything, and I kept pressing him, and I finally said, "Now, Colonel, if you did have bodies, if Roswell did happen, if you had bodies and you had to preserve them, where would they be today?" And he, without hesitation, he went, "Why, of course, Dugway, Biological Medical Research Facility. That's where they would be."
Interesting.
So the point being, it wouldn't be Wright-Pat if things had been moved out of Groom Lake, out of 51. That is where we're focusing right now. Area 52, Dugway in Utah.
Well, with the backwards engineering, which would have to take place with any type of technology like this, that reverse engineering was happening at Wright-Pat and then tested at Area 51. They wouldn't test it in Dayton. And of course, I'm referencing Bob Lazar and the things that he had seen at S4. Is that the way it would have gone down?
I'm still very skeptical, and in fact, I still maintain the position, Jimmy, that it's a cover-up of ignorance, that after all these years, they still can't find the on button, so to speak. I think it's partly, human arrogance that we think we can bridge the technology.
Sure.
That it'd be no different than sending a television back to the Middle Ages, and I'm sure they could figure it out. Of course, they couldn't.
No, they couldn't.
And the very thought that we've been able to reverse engineer something that may be, simply 100 years ahead of us.
No, that's
possible, but I find it unlikely, because here you have these Navy pilots, and as I have often encountered in talking to SAC officers and pilots all over the country, they are still in awe of this technology. They are still behaving as though, my God, these things are defying the laws of physics. How can they do that?
Well, it's a very easy way to look at it and to demonstrate. And it's like this. Don, you know what a cell phone is. I've seen your flip phone. Okay, so you know what?
No, I got rid of that a few years ago.
You got rid of that thing. You know how chic that is today to have that Don Schmitt flip phone.
They're coming back.
They're coming back.
Yes.
But you and I and an engineer from Apple and 50 other design engineers, right, and software engineers, if we all are on a desert island, right, no means of production, right, but we have the knowledge, that doesn't mean we're going to be able to produce iPhones the next day. As a matter of fact, you would never see an iPhone on that desert island because we may know what they are, but the means of production or how to get it done, that's something else. And that's where society is today, is an overlapping of building on the past. But just because you have the idea of a flying saucer and the propulsion system doesn't mean you know how it ticks, or that you're going to be able to build one, or that it's going to, you know what I mean? It's not that kind of party.
Exactly. In fact, I'll cite the example. He was a flight engineer. He was with the 393rd Bomb Group at Roswell in 1947, the late Sergeant William Ennis. And they were in charge of the B-29s, the silver plates. As he would put it, we could take them apart down to the last rivet and put them back together again. That's what they did. And he talked about what happened. He talked about when they first saw the remains of the crash. And he went, Don, before I go, you got to find out how that damn thing flew. It didn't have a moving part on it. So what do you reverse engineer?
Yeah, exactly.
What if the thing flew? What if it was thought projection? What if the memory material was the propulsion? The very idea, you climb into the seat and you just tell it, you just project it, your mind as far as what you want it to do. How do you reverse engineer that?
You can't. You can't. You simply can't.
Yeah.
It would just sit there on the tarmac. Let's take a quick break. Our guest tonight, Don Schmitt. We're talking about his book just released in paperback, UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Patterson. We'll be right back after this short break. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Email is jimmy@jimmychurchradio.com. You can get Don's paperback, UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Pat, right now at Amazon. We've got the links over at jimmychurchradio.com. It's a great read. And Don, here we go. You ready?
I'm ready.
I just gotta hear you share this. The fighter ace meets something squiggly.
Colonel Marion Magruder. He was War College class of 47-48. And as the War College goes, these are high-ranking. Lieutenant Colonel is the lowest rank. But they're all being schooled as far as in mainly foreign intelligence and then public relations as to essentially creating impressions and propaganda and topics that are very sensitive and creating a human perspective, whether on the American front or on a foreign front. So that's what they're being schooled in, basically public relations. So Magruder was a triple ace from World War II. So highly awarded, highly respected member of the War College, and he's dying of cancer in 1995. And one by one, he confides to his 5 sons that he was with the War College, and at some point they were taken to Wright-Patterson, and they had a whole series of projects, but one of them involved going into a room and having some wreckage some metallic material passed around that they were able to handle, that they were able to examine. And they were asked for their opinions. They were asked, well, what do you make of this? What do you think of this? And it was, again, some of the memory material, this material that right before your eyes, it was like it was alive. You could manipulate it. It was malleable. You could twist it. You could crunch it, fold it, and yet it would always return back to its original shape and size right before your eyes. And then he would describe that they were taken into another room. And they immediately saw that what was in this glass enclosure, the separated room, was not human. The stories were true. The rumors were true. And it was explained to them that it was the survivor from Roswell. And he felt great pity for what he saw, that he felt as though that it was almost imprisoned, that it was a laboratory animal, so to speak, and what they were all doing to it. And when he was asked, well, how did it look, or what did they call it, and he used the word squiggly, that it was a very spindly body, and it was ashen gray as far as its skin tone, that type of thing. And then he would hear that it died a short time thereafter as a result of all of their experiments and testing and work as far as on the survivor. And then we verified that Magruder had actually been stationed in April of 1948, that he was at Wright-Pat. We found the documents. He was there in April of 48. So it confirmed at least his being assigned to the base as part of the War College in April 48. And then his deathbed testimony to his sons. Each were told the exact same account, same scenario. But it further confirmed the eyewitness testimony that we've had regarding Roswell, whether civilian, whether the fire department, whether the sheriff's department, or whether the personnel on the base, the base hospital at Roswell, that there was a lone survivor as a result of the crash.
I want to go through, I want to set this up really quick. What was Project Sign? Project Sign was the very first official UFO investigation, originating in 1948, right after Roswell, within months after Roswell. General Lawrence Craigie, who had sent a representative by the name of Ben Games. He was his aide who went to Roswell to represent the general and then returned and gave him a full account. And according to Games, he doesn't know, what the general did with the information, but it was not about a weather balloon recovery. And Craigie then was the one who made the recommendation and then signed the very papers that initiated Project Sign. Its classification was not top secret, but it was more mid-grade to secret at the time. But what we need to point out is that at the end of 49, when they released the report, and it went up the chain of command to then Secretary of the Air Force, General Hoyt Vandenberg. Mm-hmm. He ordered the report burned, destroyed. That was
which in itself is illegal.
That was the estimate of the situation, right?
No, that was part of it. Estimate of the situation was a preliminary report that we've never seen. We've had some carrots, dangled at times that a page or two has been discovered in someone's files, but the estimate supposedly was either destroyed or hidden away, never to be seen again. But it was Project Sign that was actually ordered by Vandenberg to be destroyed. He would use the argument that it did not provide enough physical evidence, but one of the things in checking in Vandenberg's background, he was very concerned about panic. In fact, he talked on a number of occasions about the War of the Worlds radio broadcast, that he was concerned that we would actually have that very reaction on the part of the public.
And then we have Project Grudge.
And interesting that it would even have that very name, Project
That's right.
Grudge, where they cleared away almost all of the pro-ET consultants, investigators with sign, replaced them all with hard-line skeptics, debunkers. And Project Grudge's then final conclusion that this was mass hysteria, mass hallucination, and it goes from just imagine, it goes from Project Sign's final summation that we were dealing with an interplanetary phenomenon, that we were dealing with something manufactured off the planet. That was Project Sign's final conclusion. And from that to Project Grudge, dismissing it all away as being just part of the silly season, all media-induced, and that there was nothing, there was no actual phenomenon that was even, being observed by the general public.
And then we have Project Stork. And
Project Blue Book.
No. Well, hold on. Don't get ahead. Don't get ahead of your skis, young man. Don't get ahead of your skis, because we've those that have researched the subject are somewhat familiar with Project Sign and how one went into the other, and then and I think that urban legend is that Project Sign turned into Grudge, which turned into Blue Book. Okay, we can go with that, but I have never heard of Project Stork, not until this book. What was Project Stork?
Project Stork was at the tail end of Grudge, and then it went into, because Captain Edward Ruppelt was just coming into play at the time. In fact, the reason, and you describe it accurately, Jimmy, the fact that Grudge morphed into Blue Book. And the point being that with the newly appointed director, Captain Edward Ruppelt, with Hynek still as the scientific consultant, that they were going to completely reverse course, and they were going to approach this scientifically. They were going to come up with some resolution within a year, and one of the first things that both Ruppelt and Hynek then advised and encouraged was a systematic study of the data. And the Air Force wasn't going to do it. So Project Stork was contracted out to Battelle Institute just down the road in Columbus, Ohio. And they did this statistical analysis, and it's where Hynek demonstrated that the more data they had, the better the cases. I mean, the media, the skeptics were always, providing this impression that, well, the more information we have, the easier it is to explain away. No, it was the exact opposite, and that's what Stork demonstrated. In fact, Stork demonstrated that almost 25% of the cases they investigated were unexplainable. And that was another reason that we haven't heard about Stork, because they were making progress. It was an actual scientific investigation of the reports that were coming in. And again, the Air Force, that was not their assignment. Blue Book, as we then would quickly see, became a public relations front. They had no intention of conducting a legitimate investigation of the UFO phenomenon.
when Blue Book started to come to its end, the impression that the world had and the UFO community was that the Air Force says we're done. There's nothing to this. We're not going to fund this anymore. Project Blue Book is closed. What's the real reason for stopping? What was the real reason for the downfall of Project Blue Book?
Well, first of all, they needed a scapegoat. And that was when they hired, as far as Washington actually hired, an outside contractor in the guise of Dr. Edward Condon. They conducted, as far as the Condon Committee in University of Colorado at Boulder, from 1966 to the end of 1968. And they produced an over 700-page report, which even the Condon Committee couldn't explain 25% of the cases they investigated. Now just imagine, you have 25% unknowns, no different than Blue Book for having investigated over 13,000 cases, and 701 remained unexplained. How do you then just wash your hands and say it's 100% explained? We've accomplished, we fulfilled our mission. It's all been explained conventionally, prosaically, astronomically, as far as conventional aircraft, balloons, birds, what have you. But the truth being, Condon couldn't explain 25% of the cases they investigated, and Blue Book left 701 cases unexplained. That's still a lot of meat on that bone. And yet, the Air Force, they just used it as their official swan song. They bowed out at the end of 1969, officially in January of 1970, and in reality, they went underground. Because, as we also demonstrate in the book, Hynek still served as a consultant at Wright-Patterson on his newly assigned title, Consultant on Controversial Aerial Phenomena. Well, I know certain colleagues would like to argue that's not UFOs, but then please tell me what else is that? Consultant on Controversial Aerial Phenomena. I'm sure it's not the SR-71 Blackbird.
Well, was it their way of keeping Hynek under control, too, as well? Because
Yes, totally. Because just imagine, they announced that they are ending the project. And Hynek is fully aware that, as he described, and as I mentioned earlier in the program, all the hardcore cases were going upstairs. They were going directly to Washington. Even General Arthur Exon described to us that as the base commander in 1964, that they were fully aware that Blue Book was just a nickel and dime project. It was not a legitimate investigation, that the true investigation involved officers 8 to 12, even 15 at times, who would arrive at Wright-Pat, and they would fly off in an assigned jet in one direction, while the two investigators at Blue Book would fly off in a little single-engine plane in the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. Blue Book would report back to Wright-Pat, and the true investigation would report back to Washington. Hynek was aware of that. Hynek would have immediately started to cry foul, but they kept him on that short leash. And it wasn't until the fall of 1973, and that's where we have that chapter in the book, and Colonel Robert Friend was a witness to it, as well as Hynek's secretary, Jenny Zeidman, when Hynek stormed out of Colonel George Weinbrenner's office yelling, "Patsies, patsies, they're trying to make us patsies all over again." And that's when Hynek went back to Evanston. He called up his good friend and colleague, Sherm Larson, and said, "Let's get together tomorrow. We're going to start that organization that you are encouraging me to do." And that was the birth of the Center for UFO Studies.
How old were you when you got involved?
I was just out of college, so I was in my early 20s.
Early 20s. Pretty exciting times, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Because we had a common enemy. There was a common approach, and with Hynek being the pioneer, being the spokesperson, and this is after now Dr. James McDonald has passed away.
Right.
I've long suggested that he was the true scientist who wasn't shackled by security, by the Air Force. And so if McDonald would have lived, who knows where we might be today. We may have had disclosure many years ago with McDonald leading the charge. But with Hynek, he still was under a security oath. In fact, to the day Hynek died, he still had a security oath to maintain.
Yeah, James McDonald. That's sad. That's one of the craziest stories. Yeah, that's one of the craziest stories in all of ufology. And I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of not only his death and the reality of it, but his personal life and how it was just, man, he was targeted. That's all there is to it.
He was targeted and he was tormented. And even when he testified in Washington, and I'll never forget how, because McDonald was also in the forefront of supersonic commercial flight, and even the SST, as it was called before the Concorde, and how Teddy Kennedy just lambasted him, just ridiculed him to no end. That anybody that is also in favor of the SST, and then he's also preaching to us about UFOs, and they made a laughing stock out of him.
One of the best titles of any chapter in any book in publishing history is Chapter 23. The jawbone.
The jawbone that spoke Martian.
The jawbone that spoke Martian. Yes. What's going on
John
here?
John Musgrove was a dental technician. In fact, he had even worked. He was assigned to Wright-Patterson for years before going into private practice just outside of Dayton. So he was still, in close proximity of the base. And he worked on the fourth floor of a lab facility back in 1979. And his boss approached him one day and said, "I need this by tomorrow. I need you to create a replica without haste. Don't ask me any questions, and I'll be back tomorrow." And Musgrove would take what he thought was an impression from someone's mouth, and he took it to a sink, thinking he'd have to, wash it of any blood, any saliva remnant that was on it, and he realized it was an actual bone. It was a mandible, the lower jawbone of something. And as he looked at it, he thought, "My God, this isn't human. This doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. I wonder if it's an animal." But then as he examined it more and more closely, he thought, well, it's too big for most animals. It's still, looks like some type of a humanoid, something still closely related to a human. He made up the impression, made the relief, and his boss returned the next day and warned him not to say a word, that this, because Musgrove said, "Well, where's the paperwork? I need to sign off on this." And he said, "You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything that requires any type of signature." And then to ensure that Musgrove wouldn't say anything, he took the relief impression to create the second replica, the model, and he crumbled it up and he tossed it into the trash. So he left, and Musgrove followed at a safe distance. And then he watched as he went out into the parking lot, and Musgrove observed two Air Force officers with a briefcase. And they took the original bone mandible and the new impression, the new replica, placed them in the briefcase, and Musgrove recognized one of the officers from originally being at Wright-Patterson. So then it started to come together for him. He started to realize what was at stake, what was going on. He quickly rushed back to his office. He retrieved that crumbled impression relief, and he made up a new one. He created a whole new replica, and he kept that in a bank security box for 31 years. And then it was the late Carl Day, who was an Emmy Award-winning reporter at NBC in Dayton, and he turned it over to him. And then Day used it for leverage and getting stories and sources out of Wright-Pat that he had this replica of what clearly was something non-human. And in fact, since we acquired, and I remain in contact with John Mosgrove all these years, he made another replica for us, which we have on display at the International UFO Museum in Roswell. And we've had anthropologists examine it time and time again, and it is not of any animal, any species on Earth. And as far as they are concerned, it's something not of this Earth. It is not of any species from this Earth.
I have a bunch of questions from the listeners. Want to take the time to go through these? You ready?
Please, that's what I'm here for.
Okay. First up, what is Don's source for Project Stork?
Project Stork would be part of Hynek's files and Edward Ruppelt. The fact that Ruppelt, who in many ways headed the project, because he, as an engineer, was especially keen on the idea that we were dealing with a physical aircraft. We were dealing with something that was manufactured, even albeit that it may be off the planet, that we were dealing with hardware, nuts and bolts. And so in fact, Ruppelt's book, Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, he references Stork to some degree. And then the documents have also been retrieved through Freedom of Information Act in recent years.
Next question, Jimmy, does Don have any thoughts on retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Richard French claims that there were two craft that came down at Roswell, one being brought down by military energy weapons?
Well, first of all, and as I used to always very affectionately remind my recently departed colleague and friend Stanton Friedman, when he would talk about the collision of two objects creating multiple crash sites, I would say, Stan, we need to prove one. Let's not make it ridiculous. There is absolutely no evidence that there were more than one craft involved, albeit there are multiple sites, but all concerning one object, one craft of unknown origin. The French testimony has never been corroborated. In fact, we interviewed him long before he even testified at the citizens' hearing in Washington. And he's not been able to provide any corroboration on his part. And all of the eyewitness testimony supports that this was a single craft. There was a severe lightning storm that also has been verified for the night in question. And whether we assume that it was struck by lightning or it was some type of internal malfunction, that is totally open to speculation. We just don't know what actually caused the crash.
Yeah, I mean, so we have Roswell, we have Corona, and we have Aztec, right?
Well, Roswell, if we talk about Corona, that is the location of the debris field. That is where the craft exploded, whether struck by lightning or malfunction. It rained debris that covered an area of almost a mile long. There was a secondary body site 2.5 miles east-southeast of that location, where 2 bodies were recovered, and then there was a final impact site much closer to Roswell of a egg-shaped pod, a capsule, about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, and that's where 2 additional bodies plus the survivor were recovered. Aztec is a separate incident a year later, but from Corona, trajectory towards Roswell is all part of the same event, the same incident.
So just one craft, not 2.
Correct.
Next question. Does Mr. Schmitt have info on what the Wilson docks were referring to when it was mentioned that there was a craft recovered at an archaeological dig? Have you read the Wilson Davis docks?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
And that would suggest, again, Roswell, because even in the original Roswell incident book by Moore and Berlitz, it was suggested that who first stumbled upon the crash site was a team of archaeologists. And when we finally determined that it was Western Tech that was part of a archaeological project north of Roswell at the time of the incident. The head of the project was Professor William Curry Holden, and Kevin Randall had interviewed him just prior to his death, and he confirmed being there. He confirmed not only being there and that they had seen everything. He would not elaborate, he wouldn't go into detail, just that they were also sworn to secrecy. They were told to never talk about it again. But we did confirm they were working north of Roswell at the time of the incident. So archaeologists, again, would suggest Roswell.
Next question. This is actually, you kind of touched upon this. If we as humans had all of the answers to all of these questions, would it change anything?
Well, I would even go a step further, and I've often pointed this out to the skeptical community. If we're wrong, if I'm wrong, if the pro-UFO, pro-investigation, let's determine once and for all what we're dealing with, nobody has any answers, we're still working on this, but if we're wrong, it doesn't change anything. But if the skeptical community is wrong, it changes everything. And that's why I think they feel that they have the most at stake, the most to lose. Because overnight, it creates, like even in Bryce Zabel and Richard Dolan's book after AD Disclosure,
mm-hmm.
that what effect does it have as far as what culturally, the culture shock, what does it have effect as far as it have on the economy, the stock market, as far as the price of crude oil, as far as to the banking, the international banking institutions, organized religion, on and on and on. And we all, live as far as on, very safely on this little capsule called planet Earth. And we're all here, going through the same, ride through space, which is, just happens to be our very lives. And we all work and we all play and we all hopefully get along with one another. But this, throws a monkey wrench in the works, so to speak.
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But then I would take it one step further, because given Roswell happens, okay, I'm 99% convinced that Roswell indeed was the recovery of a craft of unknown origin, okay? There was no mass suicide. There was no panic in the streets. Those people went through the motions. They did what they had to do. They didn't have anything in the Army field manual of how to deal with this. There was nothing in, as far as in the human awareness of dealing with a craft from another planet. Even our perception of visitors from outer space, whether it was Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers back then, they were flying rockets and they looked like human beings. But yet Roswell, again, changed everything. But they lived out their lives, they worked their jobs, they raised their families, they even kept going to church, and they were there. They were back there in 1947.
Right.
And here we are 72 years later, and we've digressed. We can't handle this. No. I don't think you would be impacted by it any more than I would, Jimmy, in just saying, I knew it. I knew it.
You're right about that, and I think the evidence is stronger where Roswell was real, right? We get the announcement, okay, we recovered a flying saucer, and nobody's going to freak out on that. They're going to freak out and be pissed because they were lied to about it.
Yes,
that's the issue.
That is the issue, exactly, Jimmy. The culpability, the fact that civilians were threatened, children were threatened. The point being that the military, unless martial law is declared, they have absolutely no authority over civilians. And the fact that they were behaving as stormtroopers, going into people's homes, telling parents they would kill their children if they ever talked about this again. Who's going to be responsible for that today? Who's going to finally say, well, we did what we had to do? Okay, yes, I can accept that. But the point being, you still did it. You've been lying about even doing it all these years. And now we're going to trust you. Now we're going to believe you. No.
What do you make of the big push that's going on right now with UFOs, or you want to call them UAPs? It doesn't matter. In the mainstream media, is there an agenda behind this?
As we were discussing at the beginning of the program, Jimmy, I'd like to believe that because it involves the Navy, it's fresh turf. It's cases that have not been publicized. The Air Force, Sign, Grudge, Blue Book, it's except for Sign, which was destroyed, but a lot of the case files are still there. Blue Book, most of the case reports are there. There's a lot of gun camera references. I love to see those films. So there's a lot of photographs, a lot of film that the Air Force is still holding on to. But nonetheless, this is, again, another branch of the military sticking its neck out, saying that they're providing new regulations for their own personnel to freely report such things. And so is this the advent of a whole new opportunity for pilots to now go public, to go to the press and report such things? Or is it, again, a smokescreen? Are we going to learn at some later date that it was a new aircraft that they have been testing and they just did not want to divulge or release the information to the Russians or the Chinese? And we have to be very careful. And I, for one, can speak to that better than most, because when it looks too good, it usually is.
Well, do you ask why? I mean, why now? What's the reason for it? Is it because they can't control the situation anymore? That the public now is going to get the answers that they seek, and they may find out something that the government doesn't want them to find out, and this is their way of trying to get out in front of the story?
Well, you mentioned like Bob Lazar earlier.
Right.
And the distinction, and I always ask, because I'm on the fence with Lazar. And for this reason, we could cite the example of Edward Snowden, whether one believed he to be a hero or a traitor. But nonetheless, as a whistleblower, the thought being that he had to flee the country for protection. I mean, who would have ever imagined that you'd have to go to Russia as an American for asylum, for nothing more than just speaking out about something you disagreed, something you saw, and you felt that the public needed to know.
Right.
And yet that was not the case with Lazar, that he was able to freely speak out, and there may have been some, minor attempts to discredit him, but nonetheless, nobody stopped him. He's still here. He spoke quite freely, and he actually spoke quite detailed about something that supposedly would be rather sensitive, considering, their entire cover-up of the entire UFO situation. So, and then bringing it to the fore, bringing it to today, the thought being, I hearken back to like when the MJ-12 documents came out in 1987, and I was representing CUFOS going back and forth to Los Angeles. And I was meeting with the players at that time. I was meeting with Bill Moore and Jamie Chandray. And not directly with Richard Doty, but he would have been next on my list. But the constant promises that we were going to get a full truckload of documents, that disclosure was imminent, that it was all going to happen, and it wasn't going to be years, it wasn't even going to be months, it was going to be a matter of weeks. And then what became of it? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so the only thing different today, and we also talked about this earlier, is the social media. That somebody may have thought that they could just test the waters. They could once again see what the public reaction would be.
Right.
But the difference now is they can't put it back in the bottle. And that now the situation with Area 51 and the press actually treating the subject seriously, with respect. Who would have ever thought that they're actually questioning the motives of the military and realizing that there indeed is something to cover up, to hide. And so with the acknowledgement that there was an ongoing investigation by the Pentagon for all those years into recent times, and then I would suggest, well, that's only what they acknowledge. I'll guarantee they still are investigating this. They don't ever stop. They have never quit. And so the old shell game continues. And it is a game. It's a game in that you wonder for whose agenda. And it seldom is for the general public. And that's where major aerospace companies, and we can talk about Bigelow Aerospace. And Bigelow has the Mars mission and the Mars colony mission, all the plans as far as the manned mission to Mars, that type of thing. Is it somehow connected to that? Is this the way of getting funding for other projects? And is this the Navy's way of getting additional funding in trying to learn what they're actually encountering, what they're dealing with? I don't know.
Well played. Well played. That's wow, Don. That's crazy. I hadn't even looked at it from that angle. But that's a strong suggestion. They always say follow the money, right? Follow the money. Hey, I wanted to ask you really quick, Bill Moore. Do you think he follows the community? Do you think that, like this show, do you think he listens anymore? Or when he left Las Vegas that night, right? After
I was there.
Yeah, you were.
I was there.
You were there.
In fact, Stan Friedman and I were to have met with him privately yet after that swan song, and then when he slipped out the back door, because we were still willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. We still wanted, willing to get a confession from him, or at least who are the other players, to use that word again, that we should be concerned about, that we should watch out for.
Well, Doty
bailed on us. He bailed on us, and he wouldn't even meet. But do I believe he's still watching? Yes. Do I believe? And in fact, I've often, and Kevin Randall and Tom Carey, we have often commented between ourselves that Bill Moore could have had it all.
Yes, he
That if
he did
would have
at one
stayed
point.
course,
Yeah, at one point
and
he did.
would,
yeah.
He was investigating Roswell at a time when most of the witnesses were still alive. And to think that they had Jesse Marcel, who was there at the crash site, could have taken them and pointed out, this is where I saw this, and this is where I saw that. And they never took him back to the scene of the crime. They never thought about that. And to me, that's almost investigative malpractice. Unforgivable. We didn't have that opportunity. We didn't have that chance.
Right.
They did.
Right.
They did.
Right.
And they allowed themselves to get diverted, to get distracted. They saw the need to speed up the process. They didn't have the patience, and there too, I think they were trying to capitalize on it as quickly as they could, and they all paid a heavy price.
Well, Doty called in to this show. You should go and listen to it. It's up on YouTube. And just his section. He calls in. And one of the things I asked him, I said, okay, all right. Is there anybody, any disinfo agents or any speakers out there today that are like Bill Moore that, are agents? And he said, yes. And I said, really? And he goes, well, and I said, do I know them? And I believe, I'm paraphrasing here, Don, but he said yes. Mm-hmm. And he goes, top two on the lecture circuit today, like up, the top are. And I was like, well, I said, don't say any names. I'm not going there. Let's just leave it at that. And I immediately made phone calls. I mean, I talked to everybody. I talked to Stanton. I talked to Dolan. I talked to Linda, and a few others.
And they would be three. They would be three at the top.
Right. And everybody that I talked to was like, "Well, what do you think, Jimmy? Who do you think?" I was like, "I don't know. What do you think?" Well, I don't know. Everybody got this uncomfortable feeling. Doty's saying something like that. Now, look, Doty, he's a disinfo agent. Maybe that was disinfo. Right.
Precisely.
Get a bunch of infighting going. And it was
much to Stan's credit, he did most of the research for the book. And all he got was an acknowledgement.
Right.
I mean, Roswell incident was Stanton Friedman.
Yep.
And even when the entire MJ-12 fiasco started, Stan was on the outside. He was living up in New Brunswick, as far as Fredericton, Canada, and this was all going down in L.A., Burbank. Jamie Chandler, Bill Moore.
Yep.
Doty was at Kirtland in Albuquerque.
Yep. And
so Stan was, again, he was kept out of it because I know in my heart that Stan would have cried foul. That if he would have saw anything that he felt would have jeopardized his reputation, jeopardized the Roswell case, and I saw it because whenever he disagreed with me, he was quick to say, Don, this witness isn't reliable, isn't legitimate. And more times than not, he was correct. And so he was always looking at the bigger picture. And I think they used Stan as far as to their benefit, but they never repaid him in kind. And then he became, the biggest champion as far as defending MJ-12 and the documents. And where were they? They bailed.
Do you think we should chase down Bill Moore? I mean, is there a reason? There's enough questions to ask, but is there a reason to bring him back out and to speak with him? Is there? You know what I mean?
I know that Greg Bishop did the last interview with him in recent years. And Moore, based on the transcript, Moore was now claiming that it was that the true head of the aviary, that Falcon, was actually CIA.
Well, wasn't it Doty's? That was what's his name? Head of the CIA. Oh man, I can't think of his name right now.
And I'm not either, because it wasn't a name that
Helm.
like
It was
Alan Dulles, who just stands right out.
No, it was Richard Helm. Richard Helm.
It was Richard Helm, and that Richard Helm was part of this, and I guess if one were to offer him an opportunity, I can't think of a better place, that he not only would be treated fairly, but he also would get some hardball questions. You wouldn't treat him with kid gloves.
When you
yet
you're right when you say that he could have had it all. And I've tried to remind this audience time and time again that he cut and ran. Okay, yes. But without Bill Moore, we don't have a lot of things with ufology today. I mean, game-changing situations like Roswell, like MJ-12, and the list is long. And he was out. He was speaking at all of the conventions. He was the one person everybody wanted to talk to. Everybody wanted his next book. Everybody wanted to know what documents he had coming up next. And he was the cat at the center. And at that point, in 88, 89, he was at the top. It was him and Stanton, Randall, was part. You know what I mean? There was
but Kevin and I, as far as Kevin Randall, our first book didn't come out until 91, and we both went through hell, mainly at the hands of Moore and a few others, just the constant threats of lawsuits regarding our books, and that we were plagiarizing his work, and that we were stealing his case, that type of thing. And well, first of all, how do you copyright an historic event? And we were coming up with all of our own witnesses, and there was nothing ever produced in our books that has ever been challenged or claimed to have been plagiarized. I mean, that's a non-starter.
Mm-hmm.
But we were willing. And in fact, as I described, in working with the Center for UFO Studies and being assigned to work with Moore and Chandray as far as the documents, Don, we need you to authenticate the documents. And even at that time, I was in league, and I was the one at CUFOS who was briefing the late Paul Harvey at ABC News in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And Hynek did it on an annual basis, and after Hynek passed away in 86, I was the one selected by the board at CUFOS to then assume that role. So I'll never forget getting the phone call, and Don, we have some documents. We haven't seen them, but they sound like they may be legitimate. They sound like they may blow the roof off of the entire situation. And could you get them to Paul Harvey? And I was the one who arranged for Bill Moore and Jamie Chandray to meet with Paul Harvey. And he never spoke to me again.
Paul Harvey?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was going to call security on them, because they went into areas that he was especially upset, offended, when they started talking about ET, orchestration of organized religion and Christianity, and Jesus Christ was an astronaut and that type of thing. And Paul Harvey was very devout.
Yes, he was.
Christian, big friend Billy Graham, the late Billy Graham, that
Right.
type of thing.
Right.
And I had no idea. And then when they did that UFO cover live that Mike Farrell of MASH fame hosted, and they got into the Tibetan music and strawberry ice cream. We were seated here on Earth. That was the first I had, heard of such things. So it was like more became almost a throwback to the contactee element of the 50s. That they felt as the celebrity in them rose, they had to up the ante more and more to remain relevant. And that's why with the contactees, the Howard Mengers and the George Adamskis and the Daniel Frys, they kept coming back with more and more glamorous experiences with the Venusians and the Martians and so on. And again, Moore could have had that with Roswell, just with the legitimacy of the case. But there, too, it was as though he felt the need to glamorize it and produce documents and information that was not legitimate.
Don, thank you so much.
Downfall.
Thank you so much for everything, man. And I could keep going on for hours. This is what I want to do. Let's do this. 1 month from today, let's continue this conversation. Let's just do it again. Let's put you into heavy rotation. Are you down?
Fine. Would love to.
That's what I'm talking
Jimmy,
about.
you're a great dear friend, and I'm always going to be there for you. So
thank you so much, man. And again, everybody, just head over to Amazon. The links are at jimmychurchradio.com. Not only UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Pat, but all of the rest of Don and Tom's books are right there. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thank you so much.
You as well, Jimmy. Talk to you soon.
Don
Bye-bye.
Schmitt. Thank you, Don. Don Schmitt. And I just went poll to poll. I've got to roll credits right now. Thank you, Don. Stayed up late. And the last question, I should have, Don, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Somebody wanted to know if you were wearing a tie during the conversation tonight.
Actually, I'm wearing a T-shirt.
Have a great night, Don.
So it's an alien T-shirt. It was given to me. It's got a crop circle on it.
Thank you so much, Don. Have a great night.
You too, Jimmy. Bye-bye.
Don Schmitt. Faded Black's executive producers, Rita Camarion. Shows produced by Hill J. Palm, Renee, Dennis, and Bob. Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music, Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Faded Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and syndication is KGRA, The Planet. Thank you to Don Schmitt, Tom Carey, too, as well. This broadcast owned and copyrighted 2019 by Faded Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Faded Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Until tomorrow night, I want everybody to be safe. Go Beckley Tappy.